He basically started his ministry when he was 30 years old, and it was for 3 years. But he did a few things before that first Passover. His ministry began with that first Passover, but he did a few things before that, and we're going to talk about this little outline here just for a second. So we'll look at the things he did before his Passover, and then the first year would be between the first and second Passover, and then the second year between the second and third Passover, the third year between the third and to the last Passover, and that last year breaks down into like the first 6 months, the last 6 months, and then the last week of Jesus. And the things that I'm going to tell you are in chronological order, and this outline was done by A.R. Fawcett, who was born in Ireland, lived in Ireland in 1821 to 1910, and I'm just giving you the highlights, because when you go through that outline, there are 8 pages of little tiny font of all the things that Jesus did. So he did a lot of stuff. So these are the things that happened before the first Passover, just the main things. Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. The temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. The next thing was the wedding feast, the miracle that he did at the wedding feast. And then we come to the first Passover, and this is probably only, those first things probably happened within the first few weeks of the Passover. I mean, it wasn't a long time, maybe a month or something like that. And then we come to the Passover, and the first thing he did was cleanse the temple, and he made a scourge. And you need to remember that, because he didn't make a scourge when he cleansed the temple the last time. The Nicodemus interview, if you remember that, John chapter 3, and then the woman at the well. And then he healed the nobleman's son. That was what was recorded for the first year. And then you come to the second year, between the second and third Passover. He healed a man by the pool of Bethesda. The miraculous catch of fish, if you remember that. And Peter, James, and John were there. The man that was let down through the roof, if you remember that, and then Jesus healed him. He healed the withered hand on the Sabbath. And then he chose the 12 disciples. He didn't choose the 12 disciples until the second year of his ministry. Now, they were probably following him. Don't get me wrong. They were with him and they were following him, but he didn't actually officially choose them until the second year of his ministry. And then the Sermon on the Mount happened between Matthew chapter 5 through 7. He healed the centurion's son. He calmed the storm. He walked on the water, and he fed the 5,000. And then when we come to the last year, the third year, these are the things that happened in the first 6 months, just the high points. He cured the daughter of the Syrophoenician mom. He fed the 4,000. Peter's confession of Jesus as being the Christ. He foretold his death. That was the first time. He foretold his death 3 times altogether. And then the Mount of Transfiguration. So this is halfway through the last year of his ministry. And then we come to the last 6 months. And Jesus again taught in the temple at the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, in John chapter 7. So when you're reading through the book of John, when you get to John chapter 7, you're in the last 6 months of Jesus' life, starting with John chapter 7. He declared himself to be God, John chapter 8 through chapter 10. Told the parable of the Good Samaritan. He heard about Lazarus' sickness. And if you'll remember, he waited 4 days until he went and raised Lazarus. Well, there was things that happened during those 4 days. They weren't just sitting around the campfire. And here's what happened during those 4 days. He gave the parable of the Great Supper. He taught about the cost of discipleship. He taught the parable of the three lost parables. There was the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son, the prodigal son, if you remember that. Then he told about the rich man and Lazarus, and then he went to Bethany and raised Lazarus from the dead. And then he told about the rich young ruler, and he gave the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. And then we come to the last week of Jesus' life. And it began with a triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and then he cleansed the temple again, but this time he didn't use a scourge, but he overturned the table and ran people out. He cursed the fig tree and it died. He taught about the tribulation and the rapture. He taught about the 10 virgins, taught about Judgment Day. And then we come to the Lord's Supper, and he washed the disciples' feet. And then his last teachings, John chapter 14, 15, and 16. And then in John chapter 17, the prayer for believers. And then his arrest and crucifixion, John chapter 18 and 19. Of course, these are in Mark and Matthew too. I'm just giving you one gospel of it. The arrest and crucifixion, John 18 and 19. The resurrection, John chapter 20. And then he had breakfast with his disciples at the Sea of Galilee. And then his ascension, Acts chapter 1, verse 9. And this is just the highlights. This is just the briefest overview. So many things are left out. In fact, John wrote in John chapter 21, verse 25, he said, "And there are also many other things which Jesus did, which if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written." Can you imagine having breakfast with Jesus? You will. You will one day. We will. So seeing the overview of his life, what do you think about Jesus? When you see this overview of his life, the things that he did for us, Jesus is amazing. He is wonderful. He is awesome, and it's all true. He created us. He died for us so we could spend eternity with him. And he's absolutely worthy of our love. He's worthy of our worship. He's worthy of our praise. He's worthy of our time. He's worthy of our energy. He's worthy of our obedience. And so here's a question for you. What do you think about Jesus? Has your life changed because of your relationship with Jesus? Has your life changed because of what you think about Jesus?